Naftali, are we holding by Yibaylahu? Payal?
Exactly.
Okay. Let's pay test Amid Aleph on the bottom. It's 89A, but it's about 5 lines from the bottom. Thank you. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. We're supposed to be learning, we should have the Beis Hamikdash immediately. Learning Lili Nishmas, the Bas Baruch Binyamin, and Nisan Zev Ben Zion, and Refuah Shleima for David Ben Sarah, and for whoever else needs Refuah Shleima. Okay, one of the statements, one of the statements that we had before was that you were the worker was allowed to eat while he's working in certain conditions. Those conditions are met, but he wasn't allowed to. He wasn't allowed to bring along a dip to eat with the things that he was eating from the owner. Now the Gemara has a question. Is a worker allowed to take the kernels of grain, the ears of corn or whatever, and to roast it over a fire? That sweetens it, makes it edible. And the same thing, I didn't know about this, but Rashi says the same thing would be with grapes. If he he puts them over the fire, they would get sweeter. Is he allowed to do that to eat it nicer? He's gonna have applesauce. So he brings along a little grill. So we learned that you weren't allowed to bring a dip. You weren't allowed to bring some sauce to go along with it. So is this considered like bringing a sauce? What's the problem with bringing a sauce? Well, you're going to eat a lot more when you have a sauce with it, right? So maybe over here you're sweetening it. You're going to end up eating more, which maybe there was never permission for that. Well, Tashma, come and listen. Apparently, if you drink wine, you don't want to eat so many grapes. If you have cheese, you'll drink more wine, right? But the wine will probably take you. You won't be so interested in eating the grapes. It's probably the same with orange juice and oranges. There's something apple juice and apples. You're going to end up eating less. So we say that the owner is allowed to feed wine to his workers so that they don't end up eating so many grapes. But when they bring along a lunch, they're allowed to dip their lunch into something very salty, into tzir, and that way they're going to increase their appetite for the grapes. This would be like fasting. Is a worker allowed to fast the day before because he knows he's going to work with the grapes? He's going to be able to eat so many grapes. So he is allowed to, right? So over here, so that should mean if he's allowed to increase the amount of that he would eat, so maybe he's allowed to toast it as well, right? Toast the grains, toast the grapes. But he should eat more. So the Gemara says, no, lachshuri gavra lekami bayalan. To improve, to build an appetite, that wasn't our question. That we understand that you're allowed to build an appetite. You're allowed to do things that will make you eat more. But you're allowed to do something to the food to increase how much you eat. That's a different story. As to improve the person, improve the person's appetite. Yeah, that's going to be uncomfortable. To improve the person's appetite, that's acceptable, but to improve the food, that's not allowed. So far, we don't see any answer to that. Tashma, so come and listen. Says clearly, we have a brisa. It says workers are allowed to eat grapes that are at the top of the row of vines. I guess at the top it would be more. It would be sweeter. The grapes, the sun gets there more and sweetens it earlier. So, but they're allowed to eat those grapes, but they're not allowed to toast the grapes in fire, scorch them, toast them. The Gemara says, no, that has nothing to do with improving the how many grapes you're going to eat, increasing that amount. That has to do with Hasam Misham Bittul Malacha. That's because you're not allowed to you're not allowed to take off time from work to do this. So then what was our question? If you're not allowed to take off time from work, so how is he allowed to toast the corn and the stalks of the grapes? The answer is he has his family that's accompanying him to work. They're not workers. They're just going to help him prepare his food. So they're going to take the stalks, they're going to put it over the grill, and then they're going to hand it to him while he's working.
And they're also going to eat some of it.
I don't know if they're allowed to eat. I don't think they're allowed to eat, but they would accompany him to work. It's like bring your kids to work day, and they make him the coffee, right? So they bring him the snacks from the thing. So they also toast the what's it called? They toast the grains for him. Yeah. Okay. They bring the kids to work day. The kids eat all the snacks and all whatever it's called, cafeteria. You know, there's nothing left. Okay, so Tashima, we need another source.
And then the parents can't get any work done.
That's
They're
right.
So preoccupied with the kids.
That's right. So we need another source to see if you're allowed to toast the grains. Tashima, it says clearly you're not allowed to toast the grains and eat it. You're not allowed to bury it in the hot ground either and eat it. Must have been really hot ground. You can't also crush it on a rock. But you're allowed to crush it hand by hand. I mean, it's like in small amounts. It's talking about, it says tapuchim. Apples. I didn't know that they would crush apples like that, but maybe it gets sweeter when you, I don't know, there's hundreds of different types of apples. And ones that we get in the store are just the ones that you can eat regular. But apparently most of the apples are not really edible. Yeah. And that's why they would make apple cider. That's why they can make cider from it. You can't really
real apples.
Yeah. Yeah, they say Johnny Appleseed's trees were not really. He was going around planting them, but no one could eat them.
That's also true with the corn. They mass produce this corn is very unedible. And they end up using it for high fructose corn.
Oh, really?
To feed the cows.
Oh, that could be also. They could use it for the alcohol. We're holding now on 89B. So it says over here that you're not allowed. It says clearly you're not allowed to toast the grain. We had a question: are you allowed to toast the grain? If the worker allowed to toast the grain, it's going to end up eating more. So we had some sources before, but none of those sources really proved anything. Now we're saying that we have a clear proof. You have a bar that says you can't toast the grain. So this Gemara answers over there also it's because of loss of work. It's also logical. If it's gonna enter your mind to say that the issue is that you're not allowed to make it sweeter, if that's the issue, then my masuke perika, what difference is it if you crush it against a rock or against something else? Does the rock add sweetness? Is the sugar in the rock that's it says, well, you have to blame it's got to do something. The rock is probably gonna make it sweeter, maybe the way you push it against it or something. So it's gonna do something. So basically, I don't have a proof that it has to be talking about bittul malacha, but I don't have an answer that you're not allowed to do this because you're not allowed to make it sweeter, because it could be it's talking about bittul malacha. It could be it's talking about loss of work. Yeah, crushing it by hand is you're just crushing it while you're walking, while you're doing it. You can eat it like this. Yeah. So you go to the rock, you have to go to the rock and sit down. And
it says like dipping the fruits or whatever in some kind of sauce or something.
Right.
Does it have to be like, does it matter if it's his own condiments? Or?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Even if it's his own, he brings along his own ketchup. Right. Huh?
So
yeah.
That wouldn't be mutar, or is it a makruh?
No, there's no permission to bring along condiments. Yeah. I made a party once for my class a bunch of years ago. It's the 7th grade, and it was Hanukkah or something. I got pizza from the store, French fries, and they gave packets of ketchup. So one of the kids, there wasn't enough ketchup. One of the packets wasn't enough, or maybe it wasn't Heinz or something, the type that he liked. Anyway, he called his mother. She dropped off ketchup. I couldn't believe it. She dropped off ketchup at the house, and so he could eat this. It was like there's no limit to how far they'll go. Okay, it's pretty wild. Okay, Tashima. Tashima, come and listen. We're looking for a source. If you're allowed to toast the grains to be able to eat more. Now, oidrim over here is the way that is to collect. Either can also mean to dig, but here it means to collect. He's collecting figs. Goidrim bitmarim. He's collecting dates. Baitrim banavim. Every type of harvesting. It has a different name. It's like the animal sounds to bray and to crow and to the. So each fruit has a different name. Goidrim bitmarim. Baitrim banavim. They're collecting grapes. Maiskim bezesim. They're collecting olives. They're allowed to eat, and they're exempt from Meiser. This brisa gives an explanation why they're exempt from Meiser. The explanation is that if it would be a condition that the owner is making with them, then this would be considered like a sale. And if it's considered a sale, then it becomes significant, and you have to separate the Meiser. You're allowed to eat in the field before anything, if it's not a significant meal. You're allowed to eat in the field. But here, before separating Meiser, just like randomly to eat, just to pick a grape, see how it's going, and like that. But once it becomes something significant, like you made a purchase of it, so then it's already chayiv in Meiser. So here, if this would have been a condition that was made up between the owner and the worker, then he would be chayiv in Meiser. But the Gemara is saying, the Bryce is saying, this wasn't a condition that was made up between the owner and the worker. This is something that the Torah allows him to eat.
He has to put it in his own courtyard.
Yeah, right. Like in the courtyard, that would be another option. Yeah, if it put it in the courtyard, that would also be higher. That's Rabbi Yochanan's view, remember? Or Rabbi Yanai's view if he brings it into the house. But here we're talking about that if it would be a purchase, that would be significant. But over here, the Torah allows him to eat. It's not considered a condition, a stipulation that was made up between the owner and the worker. So they're allowed to eat. They're exempt from Meiser.
This whole leniency about having like a servant or something eat in the field is just in order so that it wouldn't be like cool, so to speak.
Yeah, that's what it seems. That's what it seems.
Is that how it is like in restaurants?
We were discussing that. Apparently they're not allowed to eat. That's what we heard. But pita, yeah. Depends where.
No, maybe they sneak one pie.
But pita la yaichlo, but with their own bread they're not allowed to eat. Elam kenat l'rishus mi balabayas, unless they can't eat it together with their food. Unless they have specific permission from the balabayas. They're not allowed to dip it into salt. This is clearly in the pasuk, right? Not let it dip it in the salt. So, okay, we see. What do we see from this? We think that the explanation is because you're going to eat too much. That's what the Gemara is thinking. And so therefore, the same thing would apply if you're going to toast it. The Gemara says, no, melach v'davar acher. That's what we learned from the pasuk when it says anavim. It says v'lei anavim v'lei davar acher. It says grapes, but not grapes, is something else. So salt would be considered that's something else. Just like we said, you can't bring a dip. You also can't bring salt. But we still don't have any answer to if you're allowed to toast it. Gemara asks the question: you're not allowed to dip it into salt for a minute. We have a contradiction to that. It says, this guy is digging. Here we have the word la'ader, means to dig. Kashkesh is to cover over the roots. under the olive trees, they would make holes in the ground so that the water and the whatever could get into the roots. And then if the roots were exposed, they would cover the roots if the roots were sticking out of the ground. So this person, he's not working with the finished product, so he's not allowed to eat. But if they hired him to collect the olives, or livtzar is, I'm sorry, not the olives, it's the grapes. They hired him to collect the olives. To collect whatever else there is to collect. He's allowed to eat, and he's exempt from Meiser Shater Zichsalam because this is not a stipulation between the owner and the worker. This is something that the Torah provides, the Torah allows. Katzatz. Let's say he makes up with the owner that he should be allowed to eat while he's working. No, he didn't need to make this up because the Torah allows him to, but he does make up a special stipulation. This is already like a business arrangement. And then achas v'yachas yoichal, he can eat, it's not supposed to be v'achas. Achas yoichal, he eats one by one. Shtaim layoichal, he can't eat 2 by 2. He can't make it into a meal. He can just have it as a snack. Because this is already a similar to a purchase, which would make him chayiv and meiser if there would be more than one there. And it says clearly that he's allowed to dip it into salt. You told me before that dipping it into salt was considered davarach, was like another dip. Now we're saying that salt is not like another dip. You're allowed to dip it into salt. The Gemara says, hey, which case are we talking about? If we're talking about the last case where he made a stipulation with the owner what he's allowed to do. So kivan the katzatz, once he makes a stipulation, whatever they stipulate, whatever he wants, he can make any stipulation. He can say that he's going to eat it with salt. He can do whatever, right? He can eat it however he wants. Elalav must be talking about where there was no stipulation. We're talking about what the Torah allows. The Torah allows the worker to eat. And we're seeing that you're allowed to dip it into salt. And the Bryce before said you weren't allowed to dip it into salt. Amar Abaye answers like kasha. There's no question. How do we answer a contradiction like this? Either you say the scenario is different, or you say it's machlekes. So he says the scenario is different. What's the difference? The difference is kan ba'aretz, kan b'chutz la'aretz. It depends if it's in the land of Israel or if it's outside the land of Israel. What's the difference? Ba'aretz, if it's in the land of Israel, then kavas visa. Then the dipping it into salt makes it into a meal, and that's considered that it's chayiv and meiser already. But if it's outside the land of Israel, then like kavas visa, because in the land of Israel the laws of meiser are biblical. Outside the land of Israel the laws of meiser are rabbinic. If it's in the areas that are close to the land of Israel, it's rabbinic. Not in America, but in those areas that are right now around. Yeah. Did you have it in? We had it. I just had this recently. I have it. No, I didn't.
Still at the very beginning of the chapter.
Oh, I had it in Rambam about something else. About I had it. I had about something else about which lands outside of Israel had to keep 2 days. That was the recent discussion. Whatever the case is, we're talking about one is biblical and one is rabbinic, and so therefore that would make a difference. You see, dipping it in salt is not significant enough that we should really be strict that it's considered okay. That's a set meal. This is something not just a snack. Then you should be chayiv and meiser. So if it's in Israel, we're going to be strict. If it's outside the land of Israel, we'll be lenient. The Gemara asks, "Amar Rava." Rava says, "Mi kamidi debaris kavas visa midaraisa b'chutzlais like kavas misa muter lechatchila." Usually, the way it works is that whatever the rabbis instituted, they made it similar to the original biblical law. So the biblical law would be midaraisa, that's biblical, and then the rabbinic law would be rabbinic. But not that it would be entirely permissible. They usually keep things in the same framework, just one is biblical and one is rabbinic. Elamar Rabba has another pshat. You had a contradiction between two brises. If you're allowed to dip your produce, the produce that you're working with, if you're allowed to dip it into salt when you're working and eat it, Mika, Rabbi Elam Rabbi Bain Baritz Bain B'chutz La'aretz. Rabbi gives us a whole complication, a whole set of laws over here. He says whether it's in the land of Israel or whether it's in Chutz La'aretz, the rule is like this. Chada, if you're eating one, then like kavas visa, then dipping it into salt does nothing. Doesn't make it chayiv and meiser. Tarti, if you're eating two, then kavas visa, then dipping it into salt is problematic. Katzatz, if you make up with the owner that you're going to eat, which is like a purchase, because you had this special stipulation that you're going to eat. Bein safas, bein safas, whether you're dipping it into salt or whether you're not, then you can only eat one. Because two, as a purchase, would already be chayiv and meiser. So basically what we're learning is, one, if you're eating one, then whether it's a stipulated or whether you're dipping into salt, that's fine. If you're eating two, then whether you stipulated or whether you're dipping into salt, it's not fine.
Two at a time.
Two at a time. Like Katzis. Oh, yeah. Does it say exactly which lands it is?
I think it gets into that.
Yeah.
It was in the notes.
Yeah, it's talking about outside the land. Very good. Okay. Like Katzis v'lei safas. If you didn't do either of those, you didn't stipulate and you didn't dip it into salt, then you're allowed to eat two. Then oichel shtayim shtayim. But then you're allowed two by two. Safas achas achas. But if you dip it into salt, achas achas oichel. You can eat one by one. Shtayim shtayim layoichel. We can't eat two by two. Afagav not l'rishus mi balabais. Even if you have permission from the owner, that the owner doesn't mind, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter if the owner doesn't mind. The problem is the itbalu l'maiser v'kavas visa, because it becomes tevel. It becomes grain that hasn't been fixed, and because you're dipping it, so it's two by two, and you're dipping it, that becomes a problem. Even if the owner allows you to, but the problem is that you didn't take meiser.
If it fell off the grapevine, will it be different?
The only difference there, I think, was that a poor person was allowed to eat it. Yeah. That was by the.
It says only if they're not something happened to them. If Moses way doesn't count.
Yeah. Yeah, that was if you forgot it in the field by bundles, right?
And
No, oh,
yeah,
yeah, and by the grapes that fell. What's it called? The grapes that fall? Parrot? I think it's called. What's parrot? I think it's called when the grapes fall. I listed the deformed clusters. Yeah. Okay. Now it says.
One by one or two by two. Is that like when he picks two and holds one in his hand and he's eating the other one?
I don't know exactly. I'm not sure. Two at a time. I'm not sure. I don't know. Sits down with his fork and knife and he puts it on this plate, two by two. I'm not sure. V'tarti the kavas visa minalan. How do we know that two is going to be problematic when it comes to dipping it in salt? So it says, anything that gets gathered becomes a gairan, becomes a granary, and that's like a bundle, and that would be problematic for Maisa. Okay, Taner Rabbanan. We have a brisa.
Even though it didn't go into the house.
Even though it didn't go into the house. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not according to Rabbi Yana.
Yeah, well, what we were saying is that Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan would agree to these other things in certain cases. That was only referring to the produce, possibly to the certain types of produce, but the other types of produce was in the field. If you did this, if you did that, we divided it up that even Rabbi Yanai would accept. Yeah. Taner Rabbanan. These are cows that are threshing grain. Now, it's apparently this was already threshed once before. And what are you doing over here? You have any notes on this? Why he's doing it again?
Ample to remove the outer skin.
And does it say that it was done once before?
Is now soaked, dried in another, and then trampled to remove the outer skin.
Was it already threshed
Yeah,
once?
yeah.
It was threshed once.
Okay, this does not refer to the usual threshing of grain still in the husks, but the trampling of barley that has already been threshed and piled and is now soaked, dried.
It's soaked, dried, and then threshed again. Now we're going to be discussing here if you have the prohibition of Leisachsim Shabadisha, it's not the original threshing.
Wait, that's Rashi.
Rashi, yeah. Yeah, this is talking about, this was in the last Gemara that we're just saying that 2 is problematic, right? Yeah, that's what the verse was referring to, right? Okay. So animals, cows that are threshing this this grain, or it's threshing grain that's truma or meiser. Now, normally the truma meiser is usually taken at a later state, not when it's being threshed. It's usually taken later. But here, the person was impatient and he decided to separate the trumas and meiser while it was still in the stalks, which it's possible to do that. Now, in both of these cases, the prohibition of muzzling the animal when it's threshing doesn't apply. Now, why doesn't it apply when it's truma and meiser? Maybe because the verse isn't referring to when it belongs. No, it's only your own grain. No, that doesn't make sense because it would be your friend's grain. Rashi says that regular threshing is not referring to Chumas and Meiser. The pasuk isn't referring to this. Okay. But because there's marasayan, people see that the animal's threshing. So you should take a basket, put it around the animal's neck, and you put a fistful of whatever grain it's threshing, and that way it's able to chew while it's doing, and it doesn't look like you're violating any prohibition. It says, no, you don't take the grain that is threshing. You don't take that type of grain, that same species. You take maybe kashinim, you take this other type, vetch, and you hang it over its neck. Because kashinim are the most healthy for the animals. So you want to get give the animal the most benefit. Okay. For a mini, we have a contradiction to this. It says, that cows that are threshing this grain, which was already done once, there's no prohibition of leisachim. So far, so good. There's no contradiction yet. However, the next case, threshing truma and meiser, there is a prohibition of not to muzzle the animal. The last brisa said that there's no prohibition. It was only rabbinic. Here we're saying that no, there is a prohibition. And it goes on, it says, let's say a non-Jew is using a Jewish animal. We don't say that there's a prohibition for him to muzzle the animal when he's threshing his own grain. Just because the animal, he borrowed it from you. You don't have to stipulate, you can't muzzle it when you thresh. No, he's allowed to do whatever he wants when he's borrowing the animal. Let's say you borrow an animal from a non-Jew. Say it's a non-Jewish animal. Maybe you should say, because its name is, it doesn't have a Yiddish name. Its name is Tony. So you should be allowed to muzzle it. No, that's not how it works. If you're using it, there's a prohibition of not to muzzle it while it's threshing. Okay, that's not our problem. Our problem was the truma and meiser. One said that you are allowed to muzzle it. One said you're not allowed to muzzle it. So kasha truma, kasha meiser, meiser.
The question, when it says the Jew uses the goy to do it, he's not over. So Why is that different from like Shabbos? You
Oh,
can't
the
just
Gemara
say-
on the bottom is gonna say. Well, Bishleima Truma like Kasha. We understand what's going on by Truma, kan b'Truma, kan b'Geduli Truma. There's a concept of usually if you take seed that was from a certain thing, was Meiser, Truma, whatever. What the halacha should be is that what grows from that seed is nothing. It should not continue on, because the original seed rots, and what you grow is something new, right? The original seed that you plant rots, and you grow something new. However, by Truma they didn't allow that, and by Truma they said that Geduli Truma, the rabbis made it that Geduli Truma is considered like Truma. The growths of the Truma is considered, because the seed was Truma. They didn't want you to store the Truma. They thought something would happen when you're storing it. Someone may eat it and not realize you're storing it, hanging it, letting it hang around for seed. So they said Geduli Truma is a problem. So what it's saying is like this: if it's real Truma, then there's no prohibition to muzzle it, because the prohibition doesn't apply to Truma. But if it's Geduli Truma, which is only rabbinic, then the biblical law of muzzling is much stronger than the rabbinic law of Truma. So therefore, you would not be allowed to muzzle. So the brisa that says you are allowed to is real Truma. The brisa that says you're not allowed to is the Geduli Truma, is the growths of the Truma. Meiser kasha, but when it comes to Meiser, we don't have that law. So Meiser, we have a question. Why is one say that you cannot let a muzzle the animal from when it's threshing Meiser? The other one says you are allowed to. It says Meiser nami like kasha kama Meiser kama Geduli Meiser. Maybe you want to answer me that there's growths of Meiser and there's the original Meiser, and we're going to make the same distinction that we said by Truma. Gemara says Bishlam Geduli Truma. It makes sense by Truma because we have a law that the growths of Truma are considered Truma. But we have a rule that what grows from Meiser is considered Chulin, is considered regular mundane food. The Tanan, Geduli Tevel, Geduli Meiser Sheni Chulin. It says clearly that if you take Tevel and you grow it, or if you take Tevel is the grain that's not wasn't been fixed, or if you take Meiser Sheni and you grow it, it's considered regular Chulin. So you can't tell me that this is considered rabbinically Truma, or rabbinically Meiser, like we said by Truma. Gemara says, "El kasha." How are we going to answer the contradiction for Meiser? Haba Meiser Rishon, Haba Meiser Sheni. The two types of Meiser. There's Meiser that has no sanctification to it. That just goes to the Levi. So the owner is not allowed to muzzle. Then there's Meiser Sheni, which is consecrated, and the owner is allowed to muzzle it, because the law didn't apply to that, just like it doesn't apply to Truma. That's one way. There's another way of learning this. Yeah.
Does the Gemara do anything with the Rashbi's comment?
Yeah. We're going to see something on the bottom.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's going to come out. An interesting shita, possibly the Reb Shimon's view in the whole Torah. We'll see. It's related to that. Everything from the Rashbi, they turned into a song for Lag Baimer. But for some, they didn't turn the Karshinim the Vetch into a song.
I learned a mimer last Shabbos about the Rashbi.
Uh-huh.
And the Rebbe indicated that he was held in such high regard by his colleagues, more so than anyone else.
Right.
And do we see that in the Gemara itself?
Only from those agaritas,
Uh-huh.
not in the halachic parts. In the halachic parts, it often gets rejected.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Could be, but it's actually not always strict. Actually, it's a lot of times often more lenient. Ibaya same. If you want, yeah, there was this guy in France. His name was moved to Montevideo. His name was Shoshani. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was a genius, and he knew everything by heart, like everything. Like it was a crazy genius. Spoke many languages. Rabbi Korf told me he remembered him from France. Someone mentioned to him that Reb Shimon is mainly in Kabbalah. by Yochai. It's not so much in the Gemara. It's mainly in Kabbalah. He said what? He started to list every Reb Shimon in Shas. He went through like saying what they and this guy is. No one knows his real name. I think it was like this strange fellow that would hang around and he knew everything. Yeah, the Litvisher that met him, he said, "Oh, now we understand what the Gra was. The governor of the Gra was a genius. But there's such a genius. Like you never met anyone like this. He would give a shir in Mar Nevuchim without a sefer. You know, like he was. Anyway, okay, but that's how it is with Reb Shimon. Iba Yesema, we have another teretz. We could say Hava Ma'aser Sheni. Both of them are Ma'aser Sheni v'lei kasha, and there's no contradiction. The last answer was one says you're allowed to muzzle, one says you're not allowed to muzzle by Ma'aser. We said, well, what Ma'aser Rishon, Ma'aser Sheni. Now we're saying no, they're both Ma'aser Sheni. Both Ma'aser Sheni, then you should be allowed to muzzle because it's not regular mundane food. So it's v'lei kasha, Harab Meir, Harab Yehuda. But there is a machlekes regarding Ma'aser Sheni, what it's considered. Now, Rav Meir, the one that says that you're allowed to muzzle, that's because it follows Rav Meir, Damer Meiser, Mammon Gavayo. He holds that Meiser is considered eating from the table of Hashem, Meiser Sheni. It's not really yours. It's like you go to a wedding, doesn't mean that you're allowed to walk out with the food. It's not your food. You're allowed to eat it there because you're a guest at Hashem's table. Meiser Sheni is yeah, eat in Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yehuda, in the other opinions, Rabbi Yehuda, he says that no, it's considered regular mundane food. The difference is if you're allowed to use it to marry a woman, to take that food and give it. Is it really yours or is it? Hey Chidami. Can a guest at the wedding take his plate and marry? Well, the bride is already married. But to marry someone sitting next to him with the plate that he got us from his meal. So Hechidami, you heard the question? Hechidami, how is it possible that it became Meiser, but you didn't thresh it yet? We had all these things before that has to be entered into the house, it has to enter into the courtyard. It's talking about that he made it Meiser already in the stock. Well, Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that says that you're allowed to that you have to muzzle the animal because it's considered regular money, regular ownership. But how are you allowed to let the animal eat it, even though it's regular money? I understand, but if you're not in Yerushalayim, how do you let it eat it? You know you are in Yerushalayim. You're within that area which was the outer area of Yerushalayim, and that's why in your threshing over there, you're allowed to let the animal eat it. If you want, you can say like demai. There's a concept of demai, which is something that we're not sure of if the meiser was taken because it came from an amaret. And so over there, we're strict. We try to be strict, but then we're not so strict that you're allowed to muzzle the animal that the animal shouldn't eat it. We have the biblical law that you're not allowed to muzzle the animal. You have the rabbinic law that you're supposed to separate meiser. But so you separated meiser. Now you have the meiser over here. So, but it's not necessarily really meiser. So you should not be allowed to muzzle it. Oh, that's a good teretz. Now we're answering that teretz. Truma nami. Like kasha. Kama trumas vadi, kama trumas demai. Say the same thing about truma. That one was because of a suffix, because it came from an amaretz, and one was real truma, and that's going to answer our contradiction with if you're allowed to muzzle the animal when it's threshing that grain. There says no, bishleim meiser demai ika. Meiser has the rules of demai. Truma demai miyika, but is there a concept of demai, which is the doubt? You buy it from an amaretz. Does it apply to truma? Truma, the laws of truma are much stricter than meiser. But Tanya, we have a brayse afu bitl esavidoi because all the demai. This is Yechanan Kain Gadol in Masechta Seita. He stopped them from saying Biarti HaKedesh Min Abayas because they stopped giving the Meiserishan to the Levi. Gam Nasat of the Levi, that was okay. Because there was when the Jewish people came back from the exile, the Babylonian exile, the Levium didn't come back, Ezra instituted that the grain should be given to the Kohanim instead of to the Levium.
Yeah.
So in the Vidui, in the confession that they make, that they say that I have done everything that I was supposed to and I've given to the Levi. They didn't give to the Levi, they gave to the Kohen.
Well, there was a can't, there's no Levi's in Yerushalayim then.
There weren't enough. There weren't a lot. There were very few came back. So there was, and V'gasar ala Demai, and he also made this decree about Demai that if you buy produce from ignoramus, you're not sure if maybe he didn't separate the tithes. Because he sent around messengers to examine what's going on and all the boundaries of Israel. The only thing they were separating was Truma Gedela. So you see, there was no Demai on Truma Gedela because Truma Gedela, the Truma, they were separating. The whole problem was Meiser. So the decree of Demai was only on Meiser, was only on the tithes, not on the Truma. The Gemara answers like this. We're discussing after you separate the Meiser, then you have to separate a Truma from the Meiser. So when it said Truma, maybe it wasn't really referring to the original Truma. Truma Gedela was referring to Truma's Meiser. And then we could answer it that one is the real Truma, one is the real Truma's Meiser, one is Truma's Meiser of Demai, which it could be applicable. They asked Rav Sheshis the following question. Let's say you see that the animal has an upset stomach, and as it's eating it, it's coming out right away. It's coming right through the animal. So, Mao, are you allowed to muzzle the animal, or do you say no? When does it say that you're not supposed to muzzle the animal because the food is good for the animal? But now you see the food is not good for the animal.
Oh, you can muzzle when the food's good.
No, you're not allowed to muzzle the animal when it's threshing. What's the reason why not? So is it because it's good for the animal to eat, so you're not letting muzzle it? But over here you see that it's not good for it to eat. The doctor would tell you, don't let him eat. Wait till he recovers. Or maybe the chazim mitztara, or maybe it's not because of the doctor telling you. It has to do with what the animal wants. And the animal sees food he wants to eat. Is it because you want you don't want the animal to have the pain of not being able to eat, or is it because of the actual benefit for the animal? Amalu Rav Sheshis Tanisua. Rav Sheshis says we have a brisa. Rav Shimon ben Yochai Yomer maybe karshinim etaylasha karshinim yafalam enakol shma mina b'shem demalalahu shma mina. Rav Shimon ben Yochai said that you're supposed to give it batch because that's the best food for it. Now, if that's the case, then really the reason why the Torah is saying this is even though we don't follow Rav Shimon, because Rav Shimon is Dashin and time of the Kra. Rav Shimon says you follow what the logic of the Torah is, not, in other words, once you understand the logic, then you can limit the halacha to when it applies. We don't follow Rav Shimon in that, but nevertheless, we see what the logic is from Rav Shimon, and the logic is that what should be beneficial for the animal, not just what the animal wants. Big lesson in chinuch. Kids crying for lollipops. Okay. Let's leave it over here. Let's not do the Ibailu. This is your question now about Shabbos and telling a guy to. Okay. Have a good day. You're the bottom of 90.